So all you need to adjust the brake is this tool right here, just a flathead screwdriver, nothing special. When you just get underneath the car, on the back of the hub rotor assembly, there's a small plastic cover. You then get in there with the screwdriver. You can take it off with the screwdriver with your hands and rotate a wheel up. I'll have a video of this later. And that's all you do. It's up on both sides. You just rotate it up as far as you can.
And this is what it looks like. This is the back of the hub. You can see the axle at the top and the tires. You can either get under here with a ramp or just slide underneath if you're small enough. Get that plastic cover off and then rotate this wheel up with a flathead screwdriver until it's tight.
If that does not work and you have to rebuild the assembly entirely, or you've already adjusted them up to their maximum and you still don't have any brakes, there's a pretty involved process to redo this. So you're still going to need that flathead screwdriver. I like having a stubby one. It gives it a little bit more control for some of the things we're doing. You're also going to need a set of needle nose pliers. You can make it work with some of these. I really like the locking style that lock open and close. This is going to be a wonderful thing because you're going to have to basically have full tension and pull versus, so with this you're going to have full tension on it and be pulling at the same time. With this, you lock it in place and then you only have to have the one motion, so it's a much simpler process as far as handwork goes. You're going to need a 19mm socket and socket wrench to get the bolts off for the wheel and tire. You're going to need either a 12mm wrench or a 12mm socket, and of course a socket wrench to go with that. These are going to be for the brake caliper bolts themselves. The 12mm, you can use a wrench or a socket, either's fine. You also need a 14mm socket and socket extension because it's a little bit deep in there. Of course, you also need jack and jack stands. You also need a dead blow hammer to get that rotor off. If that rotor's stuck and you can't get it off, these do not appear to have the bolt that never works anyway. So this is all you need. All right, stay tuned.
Start by lifting the car up and supporting it properly. I'm lifting with a floor jack here. You can also use the factory jack inside the car or any other style jack if you have it or want to use it. Support the vehicle with jack stands and chock the wheels to prevent it from rolling. Once that's done, you can take the wheel off by removing the 5 19mm lug nuts on the wheel. A tire iron could also work if that's what you have, and I'm using an impact gun shown here. Move the wheel out of the way and settle into your new workspace. At this point, make sure the vehicle is properly supported. It never hurts to be safe on this sort of thing. You will be underneath the vehicle a little bit here. If this falls on you, it could be very bad. Remove the two 12mm bolts on the brake caliper. They are located here and here. You'll be facing them in reverse, so instead of righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, it's righty-loosey, lefty-tighty. After that, we'll want to remove the brake caliper bracket bolts. Those are two 14mm bolts located on the back. It's difficult to see them here, but hopefully you can see where I'm pointing and you can see what I'm doing and where those bolts are based on where that socket is. You have to go through a bracket to get to the back of the hub. Once those bolts are off, the rotor should be free. Make sure your brakes are adjusted as far down as possible using the method shown earlier. The rotor by design should come off here, but that's rare in my experience. The rotor is usually seized to the plate. Once the rotor is loose, it just slides off the lug studs and shows the park brake system. At this point, I recommend either watching this video a few times if you haven't done this before, or taking a few pictures with your phone or camera to see how this all goes together and all these parts fit. It's a little daunting for a first timer, but it's nothing super difficult. Just take your time and document everything you're doing. I show all these steps needed, but it never hurts to have more data. Start by removing the two top springs here with either needle nose pliers or the locking ones that I'm using. Pull the springs apart and off. You can see the L shape at the end of that spring that hooks into the shoe to hold it in place. Rotate that hook up and out to get it out entirely. After that, there is a retaining plate behind it that we will have to reuse. Then we will be using a flathead screwdriver to remove the two retaining pins. The springs keep these pins under pressure, so push in and rotate. There is a slot in the pin itself and they only come out one way. It may take a few tries as you're seeing me do because you can't really tell where they're at, but just push in, rotate a little, push in, rotate a little, and eventually they will come out. After that, the shoes are free except for the cable on the lever of the rear shoe. I again use pliers to pull the spring back, exposing the cable underneath. Then you can rotate the cable up and out of the slot. With the shoe now out, the lever needs to come off and be put on our new shoe. Some of these I've seen actually do come with the lever. This one did not, and I'm glad it didn't because it gives me a chance to show you how to do this. These clips are a little stubborn and I don't have the right tool to remove them, so I simply bent them up. I started by bending it some with the flathead screwdriver, and then once I got a grip, ripped it up and apart with the needle nose pliers. You can see that here. You can now transfer the lever shown here to the new shoe. Make sure the shoe is the correct one as they are direction and side specific. If the lever is heavily corroded, it wouldn't be a bad idea to clean it up either with some brake parts cleaner. Once the lever is matched, add the lock washer and the U-clip to hold it in place. The lock washer is bent, so I found the easiest way was to start with it flat and tap it in with a screwdriver or hammer. Don't get too frustrated here. It took me a few tries. Once it's on, give it a few swings to make sure it stays on and the assembly does not come back apart. Then we'll assemble the new retaining pins. The pin, washer, and spring come as separate units. Add the washer, then the spring. Pretty simple. We'll go ahead and assemble the adjustment knob. One side is threaded and one side is not. The non-threaded side is allowed to free spin once in place, while the threaded side will push the mechanism apart. Go ahead and tighten it all the way down. Make sure to install this when you put it back in the car. Make sure to install this back in the car with the correct orientation so that when adjusting from underneath the car, pushing the adjustment up, rotating it up from the inside of the car or underneath the car on the back, rotating up causes the bolt to unscrew and push the mechanism apart and thus tighten the brake shoes. Okay, we're halfway done. Pull the spring back the same as before and expose the cable underneath. Slide the cable on and then release the spring to lock it in place. Place the brake in place and make sure there is no interference. I'm going to show how these locking pins go in again to give you an idea of what I'm doing here, as my shoulder ended up blocking the shot and I apologize for that. We now do the other for the other brake shoe. Again, verify it's correct. It's the correct shoe, it's the correct orientation by making sure it matches the old one. Put it in place, push the pin through and rotate until it gets through the back of the hub, and then release once it's rotated so that it actually holds it in place. We now add this plate with a new spring in. It's held in by tension, so when we're done, so it's okay for it to just be loosely in there for now. With that in place, make sure everything will push back together without interfering. Reinstall this triangle plate the same as we had it before. Now we install the new springs. Don't they look great here? A lot of times these springs will actually fall apart from corrosion and they'll just sort of disintegrate by the time you do this. So this was actually a well-maintained vehicle, or at least cleaned pretty often and kept out of the salt as much as possible. That's why we are including new springs in this install. Insert the L hook from the bottom of the spring into the shoe and then pull them over on the pin. They are both the same spring, so one spring will face up and the other will face down. We now install the adjustment knob as shown here. It should set in place pretty easily and hold in place without much trouble. Install this long spring across the two and it will hold it all in place. Reinstall the rotor, it simply slides back on. Reinstall the caliper bracket, and the same as removal. Two 14mm bolts, get those in pretty tight. Reinstall the brake pads. Again, this is a good time to change the pads or rotors as you already have them off. These pads and rotors are both fairly new, and in fact the caliper is brand new, it looks like, as well, so I didn't do that. Reinstall the brake caliper bolts. That's two 12mm bolts. Reinstall the wheel. That's five 19mm bolts. A star pattern is best when installing these as it prevents one side from being too tight. So top, bottom, left, right, something like that. Tighten the bolts down with the vehicle on the ground for safety. If possible, find a torque wrench and torque them to 88 foot-pounds. Drop the car off of the jack stands. Slide back under the car one more time to get up on that parking brake adjustment. Rotate it up until it's tight. Verify the brakes now work from the cabin. Congratulations, you now have a working emergency brake. Leave me comments if you have any. I'm also going to link to the Outback forum discussion page as well and link the two together. Thank you for watching.